About 20 years ago, I lived on Kodiak Island, Alaska. Now it's an island that's about 200 air miles southwest of Anchorage. So there's a population of 10,000 people that live on Kodiak Island. About 5,000 of those lived in the city itself. There was about another 2,500, 3,000 that lived on the Coast Guard base that was there. And then the rest of the inhabitants were in the native villages that were about the island. And so I lived there for 10 years. And while I was there, God gave me any number of learning experiences. And as you know, learning experiences are not always fun. And I'm going to share one of those experiences with you today. So I had a friend who was a nurse and she worked the night shift at the local hospital, and our kids went to the same Christian school together. So she asked, since they lived on Coast Guard housing, which is halfway between our place and town, if I wouldn't just stop and pick up her kids and take them to school and then drop them back off so she could go directly to bed when she got off of work. So I said, well, sure, of course. I'd be glad to do that for you. So the first day of school arrived, and along with it, the hustle and bustle of that early morning. You know how it is. So there were 3 kids to get out the door, 3 lunches, 3 breakfasts, 3 kids to comb their hair, 3 kids who had to use the bathroom before they walked out the door, 3 kids to make sure they actually had 2 shoes on their feet. Finally, we're in the car, and we are on our way to pick up the other girls. So now we got all the kids loaded up in the back of the van, all safely buckled in. I was driving down the road, right? Oh, there's a housing complex, and I turn off the road, and now there's a bus stop that I need to stop at before I get to their place. So I said, oh, hey kids. They didn't acknowledge my presence. Oh, there's another bus stop. Oh, hey kids. Oh, they didn't acknowledge my presence either. Oh, another bus stop. Oh, but I can see the house that I need to pick up the kids. It's right over there. So no problem. Oh, hi. No, these kids did not just ignore me. These kids ran out in front of my car and they're waving their hands and they're flashing me very rude gestures. I can assure you it was not pleasant. And they didn't just run over to the other side of the road. No, they kept running back and forth in front of my car. And I'll tell you what, I have steam coming out of my ears because yeah, this was very rude, right? And I'm getting later by the minute. And I can see the place where I'm supposed to pick up the girls, right? So finally, they just decide they're going to quit, right? And they stand right there next to the road. I'm able to pull forward, pick up the kids, drive not quite so calmly now, and get the kids to school with barely a moment to spare. First day of school, right? They shouldn't be late. So dropped them off, told them I'd pick them up later, right? So after about 3 days of that same routine, I decided that I just plain could not live like that every single school day of that year. I mean, those kids acted as if they must have drank at least 5 cups of coffee apiece before they went out to stand by the bus stop, right? So I looked at my options one evening. I sat there and I thought, well, what is it that I can do to make getting through the rest of the school year bearable? And so there was an option, a viable option, but I decided not to go with it because I would have to actually leave earlier. There were 2 entrances into the housing complex. I could have driven down to the second entrance past their place, and then I would have had to turn around and come back. I decided, no, I'm already in a big rush as it is. I haven't got that kind of time in the morning. And so I marked that one off the list. Well, the next one was, I really wanted to grab those kids by their collars, march them up to where they lived, if they would have told me, right? And tell their parents what horrible, horrible, horrible children that they had. But, I knew that wasn't really an option either. And so that was actually about it, outside of the few things that, I really decided that, actually, I really did want to live this side of a jail cell. So those got marked off the list as well. So I wasn't quite sure what to do. But then I remembered a conversation I'd had with a friend just the last week. And she had told me how she'd actually lived out Proverbs 25:22 with a cake, no less. With this cake, she heaped coals of burning fire on someone's head. I was like, oh, you know what? Heaping coals of burning fire on someone's head. Now that sounds like fun. I can get behind that 100%. So I pondered what I would do for a while, and I came up with a plan. It did not involve cake. So the next morning, it was time to put my plan into action. So I pulled up to the 3rd bus stop. And those kids, as usual, started to run out in front of the car. Now, the plan was a very simple one. All I was going to do was smile and wave. How hard can it be, right? Except that my hands felt like cement glued to my steering wheel, and my face was like frozen in place. I didn't know how I could smile, let alone get my hand off the steering wheel and wave. Well, there they were in front of the car, and it was now or never. So finally, I get my hand off the steering wheel, and I plaster on the fakest smile you would ever want to see. And I smiled, and I waved. Yeah, a lot like that. And those kids, they didn't know what to do. They started smiling and waved back at me. And they're like, no, wait, we're not supposed to be doing that. And so it was back to the rude hand gestures. And then they'd smile, and no, rude hand gestures for this lady. And so finally, by now, of course, I'm just laughing, right? Because this is too much fun. And then they finally go back to the side of the road and just stand there, hopefully in defeat, right? But so second morning, it was a repeat of the first morning. Now the third morning, I pulled up to the bus stop, not knowing what to expect, of course, and I looked at the kids who were standing quietly next to the side of the road, and I smiled and waved at them, and they turned and they smiled and waved back at me, and I pulled forward and picked up my kids. I tell you know what? I looked forward to every school day morning after that, because those kids, they were so fun, right? And so the last day of school arrived, and as I was dropping off my carpool kiddos, I was feeling rather nostalgic as I looked over at the now empty bus stop, because I knew I wouldn't be seeing them again. So I mentioned to the girls I was dropping off how I was going to miss those kids. And they had no words for that. They looked at me like, are you crazy? I said, yeah, you know what? At the beginning of the school year, there were these awful kids that would run out in front of my car, and I started smiling and waving at them, and they started smiling and waving at me, and I'm just really going to miss them. And they looked at me and they said, you know what? Those were the most awful kids all school year long, and everybody hated them. Everybody. And now it was time for me to stop and think for a moment, because you know what? Here I thought I had personally, single-handedly reformed these kids, and that they were standing there next to the road, smiling and waving at everyone that stopped at the bus stop, right? But turns out that's not how it happened at all. Well, you know, at the beginning of the school year, I thought that heaping coals of burning fire on their heads was a great biblical way to get revenge. But you know what? What I learned instead was that God was using that to change my anger into joy. And that was just one of the lessons that God taught me while I lived on Kodiak Island.
Yeah, and when Miranda told me that story, it really resonated with a lot of things that I had learned in 12-step. 12-step is another way to look at it, the gospel for dummies. And the gospel, as you know, is all about peace. And the 12-step is all about peace. It's about having peace with God, peace with self, peace with others, and continuing and living that peace. And when she told me the story, I thought, there's a great example of learning that a lot of things God has us do, we may think it's about changing the situation, changing other people, but it's about changing us. We have a saying in 12-step, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. And when we react to other people that we perceive who have hurt us or slighted us in some way, we react to that with anger or revenge or vengeance. It just causes chaos in our life. And as we choose to react to things and people and situations that way, we are choosing to continue that chaos. But when you choose to change your reaction, like in this case, the story was about heaping coals, on your enemies. It was about treating them with love, reacting to that situation with a different, unexpected reaction, giving them love in a way instead of anger.
Yes, we salted the situation with love.
Yes, yeah, again, we take the salt of the earth and we salted that situation, and it flavored it differently, and it came out in a transformation for us. And that was really, I think, the power of that story. And the simplicity, like we talk about with salt, the simple living every day, the Christian life in simple ways. It's really just choosing, simply choosing to react with love instead of anger. Choosing to salt your life situations and those circumstances with love instead of resentment or fear or anger. Because if we do those things that we've always done, we'll always get what we always got. But if we change our reaction, then life changes. and we change, and everything changes in us. And that's really, I think, what the gospel is really about, is changing us on the inside out. And yeah, so when she told me that story, it's like, oh, that's a beautiful illustration of how we change our reactions to life. So it's a great story. Only one of many, I might add. There are quite a few more coming your way that, tales from Kodiak, Alaska. It was a good learning ground.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yes.